The river didn't care about bloodlines. It didn't care if your father owned half the city, or if you had barely $5 to your name. When the water fills your lungs, everyone dies the same. I didn't know who the boy was when I saw him hit the black water of the East River. I didn't know that saving his life would end mine as I knew it. I didn't know that pulling him from the dark currents would drag me into a world of silk suits, silenced pistols, and a man named Adele Rossi. All I knew was that a child was drowning, and I was the only one watching. The neon sign of the Blue Jay Diner flickered with an irritating buzz, a dying E, casting a rhythmic shadow over the counter. Lakota Corvez wiped down the Formica surface for the 100th time that night, the smell of stale coffee and grease clinging to her hair like a second skin. "Check, sweetheart," the trucker in booth 4 grunted, slapping a $10 bill on the table. "Keep the change, Earl," Lakota said, her voice raspy from a double shift. She pocketed the $2. It wasn't much, but it would cover the bus fare to the cramped studio apartment she shared with a leaky radiator in Queens. At 24, Lakota's life was a masterclass in survival. A former competitive swimmer with a scholarship to Stanford, a car accident 3 years ago had shattered her shoulder and her dreams in a single screech of tires. Now she navigated tables instead of lanes, her shoulder aching whenever the rain rolled in. And tonight it was pouring. Lakota clocked out at 11:45 p.m. The city was a blurred watercolor of grey and black. Instead of taking the bus, she walked toward the pier. It was a shortcut, dangerous at this hour, but it shaved 15 minutes off her commute, and tonight she was too tired to care about danger. The East River churned violently, swollen by the storm. Lakota pulled her thrift store trench coat tighter head down against the wind. The pier was deserted, save for the rusting shipping containers and the occasional stray cat. Then she heard it. Not a scream, but a splash. A heavy, unnatural sound that cut through the noise of the rain. Lakota froze. She looked toward the railing 50 feet away. A small pair of sneakers was visible near the edge, but no person attached to them. "Hello," she called out, stepping closer. Silence. She ran to the railing and looked down. The water was pitch black, swirling with oil and debris. But in the faint glow of a distant street lamp, she saw a patch of white. A small, pale hand thrashing against the current. A child. The hesitation lasted less than a second. The old instinct, the athlete, the protector kicked in, overriding the terrifying reality of the freezing water. Lakota didn't think about the cold. She didn't think about her bad shoulder. She kicked off her boots, vaulted the rusted railing, and dove. The shock of the cold was like a physical blow, punching the air from her lungs. The river was a chaotic beast, dragging her toward the pilings. Lakota gritted her teeth, ignoring the sharp flare of pain in her reconstructed shoulder, and kicked hard. She surfaced gasping, spitting out brackish water. "Hey, I'm coming!" she screamed, though she doubted the boy could hear her. He was drifting fast, his head bobbing under. Lakota swam with a desperation she hadn't felt in years. Stroke, stroke, breathe. She cut through the water, closing the distance. She reached him just as he went under again. Her hand clamped onto the back of a sodden wool coat. She yanked him up. The boy was dead weight. Maybe 7 or 8 years old. His lips were blue eyes rolled back. "No, no, no," Lakota hissed. She hooked her arm around his chest, keeping his head up, and fought the current back to the service ladder on the pier's side. Dragging herself and the boy up the slick metal rungs was the hardest thing she had ever done. Her muscles screamed. She hauled him onto the wet concrete and collapsed immediately, rolling him over. He wasn't breathing. "Come on," she panted, starting compressions. Her hands interlocked over his small chest. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe, damn it! She tilted his head, pinched his nose, and gave him a breath. The rain hammered against her back. Compression. Breath. Compression. Come on! She screamed, tears mixing with the river water on her face. Suddenly the boy convulsed. He retched, coughing up water, and let out a high, thin wail. Lakota slumped back, sobbing with relief. She pulled him into her lap, wrapping her coat around his shivering frame. It's okay, she whispered, rocking him. I've got you. That was when the headlights blinded her. Tires screeched across the wet pavement. 3 black Cadillac Escalades swarmed the pier, boxing them in. Doors flew open before the cars even stopped. Lakota instinctually curled around the boy, terrified. Stay back, she yelled, though her voice was weak. 6 men in dark suits surrounded her. They didn't look like cops. They looked like reapers. They moved with military precision, guns visible in shoulder holsters beneath their wet jackets. A man with a scar running through his left eyebrow stepped forward. He looked at the boy, then at Lakota. His face was pale with terror, not of her, but of the situation. Leo, the scarred man shouted. He dropped to his knees, ignoring Lakota, and checked the boy's pulse. He's alive. Get the medical kit. Now. I pulled him out. Lakota stammered, shivering violently. He stopped breathing. I did CPR. The man looked at her then. Really looked at her. His eyes were cold, calculating, assessing her threat level. He saw a shivering waitress in a soaked uniform. You saved him, he asked, his voice rough gravel. Yes, he nodded once to the other men. Take the boy. Get him to the private clinic. Tell the boss we have him. 2 men gently took the crying child from Lakota's arms. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out. The scarred man caught her by the elbow. His grip was iron. What's your name, Lakota? She managed to say. Lakota Corvs. Go home, Lakota Corvs, he said, pressing a wad of cash into her freezing hand. It felt damp. Forget you were here. Forget you saw this boy. For your own sake. Wait. But they were already moving. The doors slammed. The engines roared. Within 30 seconds, Lakota was alone on the pier, soaking wet, holding a stack of $100 bills that were rapidly turning to pulp in the rain. She looked down at the money. It was $5,000, and she had a sinking feeling it was hush money. The next morning, Lakota woke up with a fever that made her bones feel like glass. Her shoulder throbbed with a dull, relentless ache, a reminder of the river's violence. She stared at the stack of drying bills on her nightstand. She should have called the police. She knew that. But in Port Haven, calling the police on men who drove convoys of black Escalades was a good way to disappear. She called in sick to the Blue Jay, but her manager, a sweaty man named Frank, wasn't having it. You don't show you don't have a job, Lakota. I got 10 girls waiting for your apron. So she went. She popped 4 ibuprofen, applied extra concealer to hide the dark circles, and dragged herself to the diner. The morning rush was brutal. By 11 a.m., Lakota was dizzy balancing a tray of pancakes and coffee. The bell above the door chimed. Usually the sound signaled a trucker or a local construction worker. But the silence that followed the chime was heavy. It swept through the diner like a cold draft. Conversations stopped. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Lakota turned. Standing in the doorway was a man who looked like he had stepped out of a magazine or a nightmare. He was tall, well over 6 feet, wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than the diner itself. His hair was black, swept back, and his eyes were the color of steel. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood the scarred man from the pier, and 2 others who blocked the exit. The man in the suit scanned the room. When his gaze landed on Lakota, she felt the air leave her lungs. It was a predator's gaze, focused, intense, and inescapable. He walked toward her. Frank, her manager, rushed out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dirty rag. "Hey, you can't just block the..." The man in the suit didn't even look at Frank. He just raised a hand, and Frank stopped dead, his face draining of color. Everyone in Port Haven knew that face. It was Adele Rossi, the head of the Rossi crime family. They owned the docks, the unions, and half the politicians in the state. Adele stopped in front of Lakota. Up close, he smelled of sandalwood and expensive tobacco. He looked at her name tag, then up to her eyes. "Lakota Corvez," he said. His voice was deep, smooth, and terrifyingly calm. "Mr. Rossi," she whispered, clutching the tray so hard her knuckles turned white. "Put the tray down, Lakota," he said softly. I'm working." Adele turned his head slightly toward Frank. "She's finished for the day. In fact, she's finished here permanently. Pay her out for the month." Frank nodded furiously, fumbling for the register. Lakota felt a spark of anger cut through her fear. "Excuse me. You can't just fire me." Adele turned back to her, a flicker of amusement or perhaps respect in his eyes. "I just did. You're coming with me." "I'm not going anywhere with you," she said, taking a step back. The diner was silent. People were averting their eyes, terrified to witness whatever was happening. Adele stepped closer, invading her personal space. He lowered his voice so only she could hear. "The boy you pulled out of the river last night is my son Leo. He is asking for the lady in the water. He hasn't spoken since the incident until he asked for you." Lakota's breath hitched. "The boy." "I'm not here to hurt you, Lakota," Adele said, his intensity softening just a fraction. "But I am not a man who asks twice. My son needs you, and I pay my debts." He offered his arm. It was a gesture of old-world manners that clashed violently with the threat of his presence. Lakota looked at the terrified patrons, then at Frank, who was practically praying she would leave. She realized she had no choice. If she said no, she'd likely be dragged out. She slammed the tray down on the counter. "Fine." She didn't take his arm. She untied her apron, threw it on the floor, and walked toward the door. Adele watched her go, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. He followed her out to the waiting cavalcade of SUVs. As Lakota slid into the leather interior of the lead car, she realized she had just crossed a line she could never uncross. The door shut with a heavy thud, sealing out the noise of the street, the rain, and her old life. Adele sat beside her. "Drive," he commanded the driver. "Where are we going?" Lakota asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Adele looked out the window as the city began to blur by. "To the estate. And Lakota, yes, that $5,000 my man gave you, consider that a tip. The real payment begins now." Lakota shivered, but it wasn't from the fever this time. It was the realization that Adele Rossi didn't just want to thank her. He wanted to own her. The drive took 40 minutes, moving from the grimy, rain-slicked streets of Queens to the manicured silence of Northwood Heights. The Rossi estate wasn't just a house. It was a fortress masked as a mansion. 12-foot iron gates swung open silently as the convoy approached, revealing a winding driveway, flanked by ancient oaks that looked like skeletal sentinels in the storm. Lakota pressed her hand against the cold window glass. She had seen wealth before Stanford was full of trust fund kids. But this was different. This was old power. The kind that didn't need to shout, because it could simply silence anyone who disagreed. The car stopped in front of a sprawling limestone structure that looked more like a museum than a home. "Out," Adele said. It wasn't a request. Lakota stepped out. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. The front doors opened, and a line of staff stood waiting. A severe-looking woman in her 50s, wearing a stiff black dress, stepped forward. This was Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper. "Is the boy awake?" Adele asked, bypassing pleasantries. "Yes, sir, but he refuses to eat. He keeps asking for the woman." Mrs. Gable's eyes flicked to Lakota with undisguised disdain. She saw the cheap shoes, the frayed hem of the jeans, the messy hair. "Is this her?" "Take her to him," Adele ordered. He turned to Lakota. "You have one job. Get him to eat. Get him to sleep. Do not ask questions about what you see in this house." Lakota swallowed hard. "And if I do?" Adele leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that shivered down her spine. "Curiosity kills more than just cats in this world, Lakota." He turned and walked toward a set of mahogany double doors, followed by his guards. Lakota was left with Mrs. Gable. "Follow me," the woman snapped. They walked through hallways lined with Renaissance art and marble busts. It was beautiful but cold. There were no family photos, no toys, no signs of life. They reached a room on the second floor. Mrs. Gable opened the door. "Master Leo, she is here." The room was larger than Lakota's entire apartment. It was filled with expensive toys that looked untouched. In the center was a massive 4-poster bed. Leo was curled up in the middle of it, looking tiny and fragile. When he saw Lakota, his eyes, dark like his father's, widened. "You came back," he rasped. His voice was hoarse from the water and the screaming. Lakota's heart broke. She forgot about the Mafia boss, the guns, and the mansion. She just saw the scared little boy from the river. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. "I promised, didn't I?" Lakota said softly. "I told you I've got you." Leo scrambled over the covers and buried his face in her stomach, wrapping his small arms around her waist. He was shaking. Lakota stroked his damp hair, looking at the untouched tray of soup on the nightstand. "Your dad is worried about you." She lied. Or maybe she wasn't. Adele Rossi was a monster, but the fear in his eyes at the pier had been real. "He's not worried," Leo mumbled into her shirt. "He's mad. He's always mad." "He's not mad at you, Leo. He's mad at the river." Lakota pulled back gently. "But you know what beats the river." Leo sniffed. "What? Fuel. Swimmers need fuel." She picked up the spoon. "If you eat half of this soup, I'll tell you the secret of how to hold your breath for 3 minutes. Deal?" Leo looked at her skepticism warring with hero worship. "You can do that? I was almost an Olympian kid. I can do a lot of things." For the next hour, Lakota coaxed him. She told him stories of the pool, of the silence underwater, of how the water could be a friend if you respected it. Leo ate the soup. Then he ate a roll. Finally, his eyes grew heavy. "Will you stay?" he asked, his grip on her sleeve tightening as sleep took him. "I'm right here," she whispered. She stayed until his breathing evened out. When she finally stood up to stretch her aching shoulder, she turned around and gasped. Adele was leaning against the doorframe. He had taken off his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle and ink. He had been watching them for God knows how long. "You're good with him," Adele said. The malice was gone, replaced by a weary calculation. "He's a child," Lakota said, her protective instinct flaring up. "He needs a parent, not a guard." Adele's jaw tightened. "He has a father who has enemies. That is the reality. I cannot be the soft place for him to land, Lakota. If I am soft, we both die." He walked into the room, looking down at his sleeping son. For a second his mask slipped, revealing a profound, agonizing love. He reached out to touch Leo's cheek, but pulled his hand back as if afraid he would taint the boy. "Come with me to the study." Adele said, his voice hardening again. We need to discuss your employment. I have a job, Lakota said. You had a job, Adele corrected. Now you have a purpose. Adele's study smelled of leather and aged scotch. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter and slid one across the heavy oak desk toward Lakota. Sit. Lakota remained standing. I don't want a drink. I want to go home. Adele took a sip, his eyes never leaving hers. Someone threw him in Lakota. The words hung in the air heavy and suffocating. Lakota froze. What? Leo is a strong swimmer. He takes lessons at the country club 3 times a week. The railing on that pier is 4 feet high. He didn't fall. Adele's glass slammed onto the desk, the sound like a gunshot. Someone threw my son into the East River to send me a message. Lakota felt the blood drain from her face. Who? That is what I am going to find out. But until I do, nowhere is safe. Not his school, not the park, and certainly not with his current security detail, half of whom I executed this morning for incompetence. Lakota felt sick. You killed them. I removed a liability, Adele said coldly. But that leaves a vacancy. Leo trusts you. You saved him when my men failed. You have the reflexes of an athlete, and judging by the background check my team ran on you in the last hour, you have nothing to lose. He picked up a file from his desk and tossed it open. Lakota Corves. Stanford scholarship revoked due to injury. Mother deceased. Father in prison for embezzlement. Debts totaling $40,000. You live in a rat hole in Queens and eat diner leftovers. Lakota felt exposed, her shame laid bare on the mahogany desk. My life is my business. Your life is a tragedy waiting for a finale, Adele countered. I am offering you a new script. Live here. Be his governess, his companion, his final line of defense. You swim with him, you eat with him, you watch him. I'm not a bodyguard, Lakota argued. No, you're invisible. An assassin looks for the guys in suits with earpieces. They don't look for the pretty nanny. Adele circled the desk, stopping inches from her. The heat radiating from him was intoxicating and terrifying. I will pay you $10,000 a week. I will pay off your father's legal fees. I will fix your shoulder with the best surgeons in the city. Lakota's hand instinctively went to her shoulder. To be pain-free, to be debt-free, it was a deal with the devil, but the devil was offering her heaven. Why me? She whispered. Really? Because you jumped, Adele said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. You didn't know who he was. You didn't know if you'd survive. You just jumped. In my world, loyalty is bought. But courage is rare. He held out a pen. Do we have a deal, Lakota? Lakota looked at the pen, then at the door. If she walked out, she went back to Frank, the diner, and the pain. If she stayed, she entered a war zone. But she thought of Leo's hand gripping her shirt. She took the pen. I have conditions. Adele raised an eyebrow. Oh, I don't carry a gun, I don't hurt people, and you don't touch me. Adele smiled a slow, predatory curl of his lips. I can agree to the first 2. As for the third... He stepped closer, his hand brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. His touch was electric. Let's see how long you want that rule to stand. He pulled back before she could react. Welcome to the family, Miss Corves. 2 weeks passed. Lakota settled into a rhythm that was equal parts luxury and high-stakes prison. Her room was next to Leo's, a suite filled with silk sheets and fresh flowers daily. The best orthopedic surgeon in New York, a man named Dr. Harris, came to the house to treat her shoulder. The therapy was grueling, but the constant ache began to fade for the first time in 3 years. She spent her days with Leo. They did schoolwork in the library, played chess, which Leo was terrifyingly good at, and swam in the indoor heated pool. The pool became their sanctuary. In the water, Leo wasn't the traumatized heir to a crime empire. He was just a boy. Adele was a ghost. He left before dawn and returned after midnight. Lakota usually only saw him in passing a dark silhouette in the hallway, the smell of cigar smoke lingering after he was gone. But she felt his eyes. The house was filled with cameras. She knew he was watching. The tension broke on a Tuesday afternoon. Lakota and Leo were in the garden, a sprawling labyrinth of hedges and statues behind the estate. The sun was shining a rare, bright day in November. Leo was laughing, chasing a golden retriever named Buster that Adele had brought home a few days prior. "Careful near the fountain, Leo," Lakota called out, sitting on a stone bench reading a book. "I'm okay," Leo shouted. Lakota turned a page. Then the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. It was the same instinct she'd felt at the river. She looked up. At the edge of the garden near the tree line that separated the estate from the dense forest, a figure was standing. It wasn't a guard. The guards wore black uniforms. This man was wearing a landscaping vest, holding a pair of shears. But he wasn't cutting anything. He was staring at Leo. Lakota stood up slowly. "Leo, come here. Now." Something in her voice made the boy freeze. He dropped the ball. "Lakota, walk to me, Leo. Don't run, just walk." The man in the vest took a step forward. He reached into the waistband of his pants. The sun glinted off metal. It wasn't shears. It was a suppressed pistol. "Run!" Lakota screamed. She didn't run away. She ran at the man. Leo scrambled toward the house, screaming for the guards. The assassin raised the gun, aiming at the fleeing boy. Lakota didn't have a plan. She just had adrenaline. She tackled the man's waist just as he fired. Pfft! The bullet tore into the dirt inches from Leo's heels. Lakota and the assassin crashed into the rose bushes. Thorns tore at her skin. He was strong, smelling of sweat and sour breath. He backhanded her a heavy blow that split her lip and sent her head spinning. "Get off me, bitch!" he snarled, raising the gun again toward Leo. Lakota scrambled, grabbing a handful of dirt and throwing it into his eyes. He roared, blinded for a second. She grabbed his wrist, twisting it with all the leverage she had. He punched her in the ribs. The air left her lungs. He pinned her down the barrel of the gun, pressing against her forehead. "Wrong place, wrong time, sweetheart." He grinned, his teeth yellow. Lakota closed her eyes, waiting for the flash. Bang! The sound was deafening, but it didn't come from the gun against her head. The assassin's head snapped back, red mist spraying over the white roses. He collapsed on top of her dead weight. Lakota gasped, shoving the heavy body off her, scrambling backward through the dirt, hyperventilating. Standing 10 feet away was Adele. He was in his suit, his arm extended, a smoking silver Desert Eagle in his hand. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. But the rage wasn't directed at her. He holstered the gun and was at her side in a second. He dropped to his knees, ignoring the mud staining his trousers. "Lakota, look at me." She couldn't breathe. She was staring at the dead man's open eyes. Adele grabbed her face between his hands, forcing her to look at him. His hands were warm, grounding. "Lakota, are you hit?" "No. No, I—" She was shaking uncontrollably. "Leo. He's safe. The guards have him inside." Adele's thumb brushed the blood from her split lip. His eyes were dark, swirling with a storm of emotions she couldn't pass. "You ran at him. You didn't have a weapon, and you ran at him." "He was going to shoot Leo," she sobbed. Adele pulled her into his chest. It was a desperate, fierce embrace. He held her like she was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. "I've got you," he whispered into her hair, echoing the words she had said to his son. "I swear to God, I will burn the city down for this." He pulled back, his expression hardening into stone. He looked at the dead man, then at the guards who were finally swarming the scene, looking terrified of their boss's wrath. "Clean this up," Adele barked, "and find out who hired a landscaper to kill my son. I want a name within the hour, or I start peeling skins." He scooped Lakota up into his arms, bridal style. "I can walk," she protested weakly. "Not today," Adele said. He carried her toward the house, stepping over the threshold. As he carried her up the grand staircase, Lakota rested her head against his shoulder. She could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic human rhythm beneath the monster's suit. "You're hurt," he said softly, looking at the bruise forming on her cheek. "I'll live." "You did more than live today, Lakota," he said, his voice rough. "You earned your place." He carried her not to her room, but to the master bathroom attached to his suite. He set her down on the vanity counter. "Stay," he ordered. He wet a cloth with warm water and gently began to wipe the blood and dirt from her face. The intimacy of the act was more overwhelming than the violence in the garden. He was the most dangerous man in the city, cleaning her wounds like a nurse. "Why was he here, Adele?" she asked, wincing as he touched her lip. Adele paused. He looked into the mirror, his eyes meeting hers in the reflection. "Because someone in my inner circle betrayed me," he said. "The security codes for the perimeter were changed this morning. Only 3 people have access to those codes." "Who?" "My brother, my capo, and me." Lakota's eyes widened. "You think your brother?" "I don't think," Adele said, tossing the bloody cloth into the sink. "I know." He turned to her, placing his hands on either side of her hips, trapping her against the counter. "Tonight is the annual gala at the Vanderbilt Hall," he said. "It was supposed to be a celebration. Now it is a trap. My brother expects me to be grieving a dead son. Instead, I am going to walk in there with my son alive." He leaned in his forehead, resting against hers. "And you are coming with me." "Me?" Lakota panicked. "I'm a waitress, Adele. I can't do high society." "You are not a waitress anymore," he said fiercely. "You are the woman who saved the Rossi heir. Tonight you are not the help. Tonight you are the queen on the chessboard, and we are going to checkmate them all." The transformation took 3 hours. A team of stylists sworn to secrecy descended upon the Rossi estate. They scrubbed the chlorine from Lakota's skin, polished her nails to a mirror shine, and pinned her hair into an intricate chignon that exposed the graceful curve of her neck. When they were finished, Lakota stared at the mirror and didn't recognize the woman looking back. She was wearing a floor-length gown of emerald silk by Marchesa Backless, and daring, the color matching the depths of the river where this all began. Diamond drop earrings worth more than her father's entire embezzled fortune caught the light. She didn't look like a waitress from Queens. She looked like a weapon. A knock came at the door. "Lakota." It was Adele. "Come in," she said, turning around. Adele entered, and for the first time since she'd met him, he faltered. He was wearing a tuxedo, sharp and severe, but he stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes swept over her, dark and hungry. "You look—" He cleared his throat, adjusting his cufflinks. "Dangerous." "Good," Lakota said, her voice surprisingly steady. "If I'm going into a pit of vipers, I want to look like I have fangs." Adele walked over and opened a velvet box. Inside lay a necklace, a single massive sapphire surrounded by diamonds. "This belonged to my mother. She wore it when she took over the family businesses after my father passed. It is a symbol of protection." He fastened it around her neck. His fingers lingered on her skin, burning hot. "Tonight, do not leave my side. If I squeeze your hand, you move. Understood? Understood. They descended the stairs. Leo was waiting in the foyer, dressed in a miniature tuxedo flanked by 4 new guards, massive men who looked like they chewed concrete for breakfast. You look like a Princess Lakota, Leo chirped, though his eyes were still shadowed with the trauma of the afternoon. And you look like a king, Leo. She smiled, crouching down to hug him carefully. The drive to the Vanderbilt Hall was a silent procession of armored vehicles, the city lights blurred by a river of gold and red. When they arrived, the paparazzi were a wall of flashing lights. Adele stepped out first, buttoning his jacket. He turned and offered his hand to Lakota. As she stepped onto the red carpet, the flashes went blindingly white. Who is she? Is that the new mistress? Where is the brother? They ignored the questions. Adele guided her into the ballroom. It was a sea of old money and corrupt power. Politicians clinked glasses with mobsters. Judges laughed with racketeers. At the far end of the room, standing on a raised dais, was a man who looked like a younger, softer version of Adele. He was holding a glass of champagne, laughing with a senator. Stefano. Adele whispered, his voice vibrating with suppressed violence. Stefano Rossi turned. When he saw Adele, his smile faltered. When he saw Leo walking beside them, safe and alive, the glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor. The sound silenced the room. The music stopped. Adele walked through the crowd, which parted like the Red Sea. He didn't stop until he was face to face with his brother. Dom, Stefano stammered, his face draining of color. We heard reports. There was an accident at the estate. We thought... You thought I was mourning. Adele's voice was calm, which made it terrifying. You thought you would announce your succession tonight, didn't you, brother? No. No, I was just... Stefano's eyes darted to the exits. Leo, Adele said loudly, addressing the room. Say hello to your Uncle Stefano. Leo looked up at his uncle, his small face hard. Hello, Uncle. A ripple of whispers went through the crowd. The boy is alive. The coup failed. Adele leaned in close to Stefano. Go to the private study upstairs, now, or I will paint this ballroom with your blood in front of the senator. Stefano swallowed and nodded. Lakota, take Leo to the car with the detail, Adele ordered. No, Lakota said. Adele looked at her, shocked. Lakota, I'm coming with you, she said, gripping his arm. He tried to kill the boy while I was watching. I'm seeing this through. Adele looked at her, seeing the steel in her eyes. He nodded once. Guards, take Leo. Lakota with me. They marched Stefano upstairs to the private VIP suite. As soon as the heavy doors closed, the facade dropped. Stefano backed away. It wasn't me, Dom. It was the commission. They forced me. You gave them the cuz, Adele roared, advancing on him. You let a killer into the garden where my son was playing. They said they wouldn't hurt him. They just wanted you. Liar. Stefano panicked. He reached into his tuxedo jacket. Gun! Lakota screamed. She didn't think. She grabbed a heavy crystal decanter of scotch from the side table and hurled it. It smashed into Stefano's shoulder just as he pulled the trigger. The shot went whirled, burying itself in the ceiling. Stefano stumbled, dropping the gun. Adele was on him in a heartbeat. He pinned his brother against the wall, his forearm crushing Stefano's windpipe. She saved me, Adele snarled, gesturing to Lakota. She saved my son, and now she just saved me. You are my blood, Stefano, but she is my family. Adele picked up the fallen gun. He looked at his brother, then at Lakota. She was breathing hard, her emerald dress heaving, but she didn't look away. She didn't ask for mercy. She knew what this world required. Get out of the city, Adele hissed, lowering the gun. If I see you in New York again, there will be no conversation. You are dead to me. You are dead to this family. Go." Stefatano scrambled up, sobbing, and ran out the door. Adele stood there, the gun hanging loosely in his hand. The adrenaline crashed. He turned to Lakota. "You threw a decanter," he said, a look of disbelief and awe crossing his face. "I have a good throwing arm." She shrugged, though her hands were trembling. "I played water polo in high school." Adele dropped the gun on the sofa. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He didn't say anything. He just grabbed her face and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a claiming. It tasted of scotch and danger and relief. Lakota melted into him, wrapping her arms around his neck, the sapphire necklace cold against her skin, his body heat burning through the silk of her dress. For a moment, they weren't the Mafia Don and the waitress. They were just 2 survivors in the eye of the storm. 6 months is a lifetime in the underworld. The seasons had shifted, turning the grey, biting winter of New York into a humid, suffocating summer. The heat rose off the asphalt in shimmering waves, but inside the air-conditioned sanctuary of the Rossi estate, the atmosphere was chilled to a precise 68 degrees. Lakota Corvez stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the master suite. She adjusted the strap of her black sheath dress. The fabric was modest, severe even, but it hugged a body that was different from the one that had pulled a drowning boy out of the East River. She was leaner now. The softness of a diet of diner pancakes had been replaced by the wire-taut muscle of a woman who spent her mornings in the gym with ex-Mossad instructors. Her shoulder, once a source of constant agony, had been reconstructed by the best surgeons money could buy. It still ached when the storms rolled in a phantom reminder of the past, but she had full range of motion. She touched the small scar above her lip, the souvenir from the assassin in the garden. It was faint now, easily hidden with makeup, but she left it visible. In this house, scars were not imperfections. They were credentials. "The car is waiting, Ms. Corves." Lakota turned. The new head of security, a man named Russo, stiff, professional, and utterly lethal, stood at the door. "Thank you, Russo. Is Adele downstairs?" "Mr. Rossi is already in the vehicle. He is impatient today." Lakota nodded and grabbed her clutch. Inside wasn't lipstick or a compact, but a small encrypted burner phone and a canister of pepper spray that was illegal in 3 states. They were heading to a sit-down. Not a party, not a gala. A sit-down with the Moretti family. Since Adele had exiled his brother Stefano rather than killing him, whispers had circulated through the 5 boroughs. Adele Rossi is going soft. Adele Rossi has a weak spot. Today was about proving them wrong. Lakota slid into the back of the armored SUV. Adele was on his phone, his knuckles white as he gripped the device. He hung up as soon as the door closed. "You look beautiful," he said, but his eyes didn't track the curve of her dress. They were fixated on the window, scanning the perimeter. He looked exhausted. The circles under his eyes were dark bruises. "And you look like you haven't slept in 3 days," Lakota countered softly, reaching over to take his hand. He didn't pull away, but his grip was loose. "The Morettis are pushing on the unions in Jersey. They think because I showed mercy to my own blood, I will hesitate to spill theirs. Mercy requires more strength than murder," Lakota said, reciting a line he had told her months ago. "You aren't weak, Adele. In this world, perception is reality." He turned to her, his gaze intense and unreadable. "Tonight, you say nothing. You sit, you drink the wine, and you watch. If things go south, Russo has instructions to get you out the back kitchen exit. Do not argue with him. I'm not a China doll, Adele. I've been training. I know." He snapped his voice, rising. Then he sighed, rubbing his temples. I know, but Victor Moretti is not a garden assassin. He is a butcher in a tailored suit. Just promise me you'll follow the protocol. I promise, she lied. The meeting took place in the back room of Vitra, an upscale Italian restaurant in Tribeca that had been closed for the night. The air smelled of garlic, expensive red wine, and testosterone. Victor Moretti was a large man with a smile that showed too many teeth. He sat opposite Adele, flanked by 3 associates. Adele sat with only Russo standing behind him. Lakota sat to Adele's left. Adele, Victor boomed, pouring wine. And the famous Lakota, the mermaid who saves children. A pleasure. Lakota nodded, keeping her expression neutral. Mr. Moretti. The pleasantries dissolved within minutes. The conversation turned to territory, percentages, and shipping lanes. It was a verbal chess match, but Lakota could see Adele was distracted. He was playing defense, reacting to Victor's jabs rather than controlling the board. You see, Dom, Victor said, leaning back and swirling his glass. The issue is stability. My partners are worried. They hear stories about your brother running a bookie joint in Chicago. They wonder why he still breathes. It makes them nervous about your commitment. My brother is dead to this city, Adele said, his voice low. That is enough. Is it? Victor chuckled. Or is it that you've got a soft heart now? Maybe the domestic life suits you better than the streets. He glanced at Lakota, his eyes lingering on her chest. Maybe you're too busy playing house to run an empire. The insult was sharp and deliberate. Adele's hand twitched toward the inside of his jacket. Lakota saw the shift in the room. The Moretti guards shifted their weight. Hands hovered near waistbands. If Adele drew, it would be a bloodbath, and at this range, Adele would lose. Lakota laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that cut through the tension like a knife. Every head in the room turned to her. Something funny, sweetheart, Victor sneered. Lakota picked up her wine glass, looking bored. I'm just amused, Mr. Moretti. You talk about stability, yet your own nephew was picked up by the feds 3 days ago on a RICO charge because he couldn't keep his mouth shut on a wiretap. Victor froze. What did you say? Adele didn't bring it up because he has manners. Lakota continued, her voice smooth silk wrapped around steel. But we know your shipment in the harbor is currently frozen by customs. You aren't here to threaten us, Victor. You're here because you need Adele's connections at the Port Authority to release your merchandise before it gets seized. She took a sip of wine, locking eyes with the large man. So let's cut the tough guy act. You need a favor. Ask for it nicely. Silence. Absolute suffocating silence. Adele stared at her, his mouth slightly open. Victor's face turned a shade of purple, then slowly he exhaled. The tension in his shoulders dropped. He looked at Adele. She's right, Victor grunted. The shipment is stuck. 10%, Adele said, immediately seizing the opening Lakota had carved out for him. I make the call. I take 10% of the load. 5, Victor counted. 10, or the feds keep it. Victor gritted his teeth. Fine, 10. The rest of the dinner was a blur. When they walked out to the SUV, the night air felt cool against Lakota's flushed skin. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but she kept her hands steady. Adele didn't say a word until they were back at the estate. He stormed into the study, threw his jacket on the leather couch, and poured 2 fingers of scotch. You shouldn't have done that, he said, his back to her. I saved the deal, Lakota argued, stepping into the room. He had you backed into a corner, Adele. He was baiting you. He could have killed you. Adele spun around the glass, slamming onto the desk. Scotch splashed over the rim. You humiliated a Don in front of his men. Do you have any idea how dangerous that is? I know exactly how dangerous it is, Lakota shouted back. I live in this house too. I see the threats. I see the cameras. I'm not a bystander anymore. You shouldn't be here at all." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Adele walked over to his desk and unlocked the bottom drawer. He pulled out a thick manila envelope and tossed it onto the mahogany surface. It slid across and stopped at Lakota's fingertips. "What is this?" she whispered. "Freedom," Adele said. His voice was broken. "My lawyers finished it this morning. Your father's record has been expunged. The trust fund is fully vested $5 million, tax-free. And inside is a one-way ticket to Paris for tomorrow morning, and the deed to an apartment in the 7th arrondissement." Lakota stared at the envelope. It was everything she had thought she wanted 6 months ago. A way out, a restart. "Leo is safe." Adele continued, his voice thick with emotion. "He has new guards. He's back in school. You did your job, Lakota. You saved him. You saved me. But I cannot watch you turn into this." He gestured vaguely at the room, at the gun on the table, at the darkness outside. "I cannot watch the light go out of your eyes because of my world." "You're firing me?" Lakota asked, tears pricking her eyes. "I am setting you free." Adele walked around the desk. He stood close enough to touch her, but he kept his hands at his sides. "Go to Paris. Find a man who doesn't check his car for bombs. Swim in the ocean. Be happy." Lakota looked at the envelope. She thought about Paris. The cafes, the art, the safety. No guns, no Morettis, no fear. Then she thought about the dinner. The rush of adrenaline when she shut Victor down. The feeling of belonging at this dangerous table. And she thought about the man standing in front of her, who was trying to break his own heart to save hers. She picked up the envelope. Adele closed his eyes, a look of devastating resignation on his face. Lakota slowly, deliberately tore the envelope in half, then in quarters. She let the pieces of the plane ticket and the deed flutter to the Persian rug, like confetti. Adele's eyes snapped open. "Lakota, I don't speak French," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "And I don't like running." "Lakota, please, you don't understand what you're choosing. This life, it only ends one way." "Then let it," she said. She stepped forward, closing the gap between them. She placed her hands on his chest, feeling the frantic beat of his heart through his shirt. "You told me once that you couldn't be the soft place for Leo to land, that you had to be the wall." She looked up into his steel-grey eyes. "Walls crumble if they stand alone, Adele. You need a partner. You need someone who knows the water is cold and jumps in anyway." "I am a monster," he whispered, his resistance crumbling. "I will destroy you." "You're not a monster," she said fiercely. "You're a father, and you're the man I love." The confession broke the dam. Adele let out a sound that was half groan, half sob, and crushed her against him. His mouth found hers in a kiss that was desperate, hungry, and full of promises. He lifted her up, sitting her on the edge of the heavy oak desk, sweeping the paperwork of his empire onto the floor to make room for her. "You stay," he breathed against her neck. "You stay, and you never leave." "Try and make me," she challenged. Later that night, the storm finally broke. Rain lashed against the windows of the estate, washing away the heat of the summer day. Lakota stood by the window of the bedroom, wearing one of Adele's shirts. The bed behind her was a tangle of sheets, where Adele finally slept, his breathing deep and peaceful for the first time in months. Down the hall, she knew Leo was sleeping soundly, a silver dolphin charm likely on his nightstand. She pressed her hand against the cold glass, watching the lightning illuminate the grounds. She saw the garden where she had fought the assassin. She saw the path leading to the river where she had dived into the black water. Most people spent their lives afraid of drowning. They stayed on the shore dry and safe and untouched. Lakota Corvez had learned the truth. The water was only scary until you learned how to breathe in it. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She wasn't just a survivor. She was the queen of this dark, chaotic kingdom. She turned back to the room to the man sleeping in the shadows and smiled. She was exactly where she belonged. And that is the story of Lakota and Adele. From the freezing waters of the East River to the highest halls of power, Lakota proved that sometimes saving someone else is the only way to save yourself. It's a story about how love isn't always safe, and it isn't always pretty. Sometimes love is gritty, dangerous, and demands that you stand your ground when the whole world tells you to run. I really hope you enjoyed this 7-part saga. Writing this journey was a roller coaster. If you stuck around until the very end, please type Blue Jay in the comments section. It'll be our little secret code, so I know you're a true fan of the story. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell. I have a new story coming next week involving a runaway bride and a bounty hunter that you definitely don't want to miss. Thanks for watching, stay safe and keep swimming.